afternoon, students. This is Mr. Whaley, and we're talking about our 4.4 disorder process poster project. There's a lot of P's in that. Disorder process. Can you understand a disorder process? And can you investigate and communicate it? That's the more important part. So first of all, do the do now in the form. You should have already done it. Where it says new eyes, this is the image you use with that. So what is this image all about? Disease name is cystic fibrosis, it says, and guess what? That's the biggest words on here, so probably that might be what it's about. If we look over the whole thing, yeah, I'd say that's what it's about. What does it communicate? It looks like it's communicating the effects of diffusion, or the effects on diffusion through the cell membrane, through the a channel in the membrane. If you know, a channel is like a pathway through something. So that's what I would say it's communicating. To be more specific, it's communicating normal membrane channel activity. This is our learning intention for the 4.4 disorder process poster. I am learning how to determine the consequences of the failure to maintain homeostasis. And you would have heard me, if you were present in class, a story about one of my failures. But this is a failure to maintain homeostasis, a failure to keep your body alive or normal in some way. The success criteria checklist is I can investigate and communicate the consequences of a disorder that affect passive or active transport. So we're talking about movement across the cell membrane. How might that be affected by the consequences of a disorder? So we're focused on those consequences. You'll have a disease title, that's 25 points, normal diagram that includes a description at the tissue level, or in other words, that's the cell level. I'm going to go ahead and change that. So you be able to see, like in that example, a cell membrane. That's 25 points. Abnormal diagram with a description at the cell level. And then describe how the disorder occurs. How the disorder occurs in at least 7 steps. This is basically consequences. What are the consequences? How do the consequences occur? What order do they occur? And you're going to break that down into 7 steps, because that's how we'll know that you have investigated and can communicate the consequences. That's 25 points. Bonus is if you identify diagnostic tests, treatment, and any other facts, up to 10 points. Students did this. I can investigate and communicate the consequences of a disorder that affect passive or active transport. So there you see the disease title. They have a normal diagram. We can see the cellular level. See, I see the membrane, so I know they're focused on something happened at the cell level. They're even showing where this cell is located, the airways of the body, and they're describing the effects. So describe effects. Ions normally diffuse through membrane channel, and I can see that. They identified chloride ions, and you can see, oh, there's an arrow there. They're going through the channel normally, diffusing through. Okay, then we can look at, do they have an abnormal diagram describing the effects from cystic fibrosis? Yeah, they've zoomed in the same place in the body, and at the cellular level, we can see a difference here. The ions are down here, the channel seems to be closed, and there's mucus building up right here. So the effects they described are difficulty breathing, nutritional deficits, diabetes, infertility, risk of respiratory infections. Need to spell out respiratory, you're communicating to a high school audience. That's the only change I would make to this slide, but it's excellent. Next, I can investigate and communicate the consequences. This is where it really focuses on the consequences of a disorder that affect passive or active transport. we're describing here how the disorder occurs in at least 7 steps. And this is worth 25 points. But as far as value for your life, this ability to break things down into steps is worth more than 25 points, believe me. Etiology, here's how it happens. Etiology is that consequence process. So that's why we titled it with that. But then in our own words, here's how it happens. So first, there's a genetic code error, which causes 2, malformation, bad formation of membrane channels for chloride and sodium ions. We saw that in the diagram, didn't we? 3, sodium and chloride ions do not diffuse across the cell membrane as they normally would. We saw that in the comparison diagrams. 4, the abnormal channels make the fluid around the cells extremely salty, too much sodium and chloride. 5, too much salt buildup causes mucus to be too thick. 6, the thick mucus clogs the organs of the respiratory, digestive, and reproductive organs. 7, the clogging can lead to A, difficulty breathing, B, decreased absorption of nutrients, C, increased risk of respiratory infections, diabetes, and infertility. So here's what the teacher is able to do to identify: has the student communicated the consequences? Have they described the consequences in 7 steps? Yes, they have. I can see it even without these numbers, but the numbers are very helpful. I can see verbs. This causes, there's a verb, what? Malformation. That's a verb kind of process. And then I can see a verb here, diffuse or do not diffuse. Something doesn't diffuse right. Then next I see channels make fluid salty. So I see a verb there. That deserves its own step. Too much salt buildup causes, there's another causes is our verb for that step. And then the next one, clogs, is our verb. They underlined it. And that clogging can lead to multiple different things. So it could be difficulty breathing, decreased something, and increased something. So that's how you break it down into steps. So even though it says 7 steps over here, by verbs, I can actually see 7, 8, 9, 10 steps. So if you might notice, steps actually make things more simple to a point, right? If it took us 10 days to develop, break this down into 20 steps, well, that would be overdoing it. But for our level of understanding, as you can see, breaking this down into 7 steps, you can actually visualize in your brain this process. With the help of those diagrams and these verbs, you can understand this. Right now, you just learned it. So, right now, answer the entry ticket question that's related to communicating consequences and describing the process of a disorder.